Yeah, so I guess we can kind of end the show here with the loose topic, which is going to be our favorite Nintendo console. Now, this is obviously, I think we're going to do this like the first of 4, and we're going to go on to PlayStation, then Xbox, and then cap it off with Sega, our favorite consoles. And so let's start with you. What is your personal favorite Nintendo console? And we're talking mainline consoles here.
Mainline consoles, yeah. So I was stuck between 2 of them. So I was really stuck between, and I know it's kind of hearsay because people like to jump always to NES, but I was really stuck between the SNES and the GameCube.
Yeah.
Which was a hard one. But when I came down to the overall experience between like the mechanics of the games, the actual control, like if I wanted to sit down and play something, what did I want to play? And that was the NES. SNES. The Super Nintendo, hands down, has to be my favorite Nintendo console. And I know there's always been that big debate between NES and SNES. In my opinion, and everyone's just to their opinion, the NES does things better in every way. I understand that NES has Mario 1 and, well, we're not going to count 2, but Mario 1 and 3.
Yep.
But the SNES has Super Mario World. And I know I'm biased because that's my favorite game of all time. I'm not super keen on Super Mario World 2, the Yoshi's Island. I'm not that big of a fan of. I actually really don't like that game. But when you just look at the differences in games, the differences of not just the artwork, because I don't get me wrong, because I love the classic Castlevania artwork. Don't get me wrong, I love that pixelated, so it's not just like, oh, the graphics are better. But I just think when I think gameplay experiences from first party to third party, I remember playing this dumb ant game when I threw dominoes at each other. I don't even know what it was called. And those direct experiences like that, those just, they amplified and really made me become, like, I guess, a gamer. Because as much as I had loved playing the original Mega Mans, I could not beat them. When I get to the SNES, I had Mega Man X, which, top notch. It's a perfect game. I love that game. And it's just all those kind of experiences that's like, they're I know there's like the roots in the NES. But to me, they just thrived and became what they needed to become on the SNES. So on the Super Nintendo, it was just, I think the Super Nintendo reached the peak of what the NES wanted to do. And I understand it's pretty much a sequel in every way, and most of the games are a sequel or spiritual successors in every way. But the SNES is hands down to be my favorite console. If I had to play one Nintendo console for the rest of my time, GameCube was fine, and I was kind of a close second. But those were all so many third-party games where I was really
a lot of fluff on there,
yeah. Yeah, I was thinking on there. I'm like, besides a few like Luigi's Mansion and Sunshine and Melee. Those games are fine, but those aren't games I wanted to keep playing over and over. I keep playing Super Mario World constantly throughout the 27 years I've been alive. Well, obviously not when I was a baby, but you know what I mean. Since I could play that game, I've constantly played that game. Luigi's Mansion, I'll be honest, I played like 3 times my whole life because I know what it is, and it's fine. There's something about the replayability on the SNES. That control just is, don't get me wrong, game control is great. But there's something so iconic and home feeling when I play the SNES that just hands down that has to be my favorite console. And most of my favorite games come from that generation. And mainly because they were games. And I understand games now are like artwork, and I have a whole different appreciation to them for story and stuff like that. But the SNES had games, had my experiences, and that's what really just nested me into being a Nintendo fan in general. Without the SNES, I probably would never follow Nintendo anymore. So that's mine. That's how I cap it off. I've always told people that. That's why when I was excited to talk about this, because I love gushing over the Super Nintendo. But what's your choice? What was your favorite Nintendo console?
Okay, so I think we all know this answer already. Mm-hmm. I gotta go with the NES, and the main a big contributing factor is not only where I started in gaming, but the fact that during the Super Nintendo era, as phenomenal of a console that is, there was this little console named the Genesis at the time that definitely took a lot of my attention. In terms of 16-bit games, when I go back to there, I typically go to the Genesis, and that's the only thing that's working against the Super Nintendo, and allows for the NES to kind of like leapfrog it. Mm-hmm. But in terms of just some of my favorite games, they kind of just all happen to fall on the NES. Obviously, Mario 3. The Castlevania 3 is phenomenal. The Mega Man games going up to that point, I mean, come on. Mega Man 3, I mean, come on, man. And then, I mean, you can't overlook like Ninja Gaiden. There's just excellent sprite art, and I think what makes me love the NES so much is the fact that with its technical limitations, developers were forced to make incredible gameplay loops. You couldn't rely on awesome cutscenes and crazy deep in-depth story and crazy, leveling systems and intuitive AI to kind of mask the gameplay loop. That's all you had. So if the platforming wasn't up to snuff and that kind of the action and the kind of level structure and stuff like that weren't there, I mean, it showed through. There was nothing to hide behind. And I think there's like a beauty in that simplicity for me personally in terms of playability. And I think with every Nintendo console, you're gonna bump into the fair share of like crappy games, especially once you go into like the sports and some of the puzzle games like that. There's kind of fluff, and I mean, nothing got worse than during the Wii generation, obviously. But so yeah, the NES has its fair share of pretty crappy games, but you got to give a shout out. I mean, Konami were on their P's and Q's during this generation. I mean, that combo, and Capcom was killing it then. Konami was killing it back then. You had, Sunsoft, like all these amazing developers just killing it back then. And so I have to give a lot of credit. I love the 8-bit music. I love the gameplay to it. But again, the Super Nintendo was a very close second to me. And I had to give GameCube a lot of love. But again, when you take out like nostalgia, that does dock the GameCube a couple points for me personally. And I think in terms of like consistency, in terms of like number of games I personally want to play, there's probably the most on the NES. But again, if you delete the Genesis from existence, I think it's pretty easy for me to choose Super Nintendo. But that 16-bit generation just drew a little bit of my attention too much towards the Genesis over the Super Nintendo. So got to give NES its credit. That's where it started in terms of Nintendo's domination. Obviously, they had consoles before that point with the TV games and the Game & Watch systems and stuff like that. So they were in the console space before that point. But I feel like obviously the Nintendo Entertainment System is where they really got into cartridge-based systems and really started dominating the market. And I mean, they were generally uncontested during this era too. I mean, the Master System existed, but they weren't really doing too much there. I mean, and by that point, Atari, ColecoVision and Television, Magnavox Odyssey, they were kind of the game crash kind of got them out of the way. So for the most part, I mean, it was Nintendo only, and they had the benefit of every dev. If you wanted a place in the game industry, you're gonna have to release on Nintendo and work with them. And I just wanted to give them a shout out there.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that, like you were saying, if you wanted to get your game out there, you had to release on Nintendo, and now it's almost reversed.
Yeah,
where Nintendo usually comes last, and it's sad in one aspect, and Nintendo's on a comeback kid story, but it's wild to think that how much has changed since then.
I do want to give a shout out to the Switch though, and by no means is it anywhere close to my favorite Nintendo console yet. But on the trajectory they're on, if they can figure out Virtual Console, like in a real substantive way, and continue with these really quality first-party IPs, man, I could see it leapfrogging GameCube for me personally if they keep on this trajectory. Who knows what this could be? I mean, who knows? They could be shooting blanks for the rest of the generation, theoretically. But I mean, hey, if they continue and Breath of the Wild 2 is a hit too, I mean, a lot of those accolades of like the best Mario games and the best Zelda games and stuff like that, and if they release like a F-Zero game and Metroid comes back, a lot of the great titles from the Super Nintendo and NES titles can have a strong presence on the Switch, and that can put them in a position. I would understand a lot of people putting Switch as their favorite Nintendo console.
That's true. It would easily climb up there, because obviously Wii and Wii U are not going to be on my list of like favorite. So it obviously goes from those to the Switch, and that's why me and you being such big fans, and I kind of always guessed that you were gonna choose NES. And I'm sure you could guess I was gonna pick SNES.
Oh yeah.
But that's why you and I get so upset with Nintendo, the way Nintendo's doing their online service with the release of NES games and SNES games, because there's so many good titles. I know licensing is a small issue, but you're Nintendo. All these crazy good titles, even first-party titles, and they release like weird, dumb games. They just they give us one game every 3 months. They just release like one random Japanese NES game that no one even knew what it was on that their solution to Virtual Console. that's why you and I get so upset with them, because like you have the good games, and we're paying you your service, your $20 a year. I know it's not a lot, but for this, so I can go to use my so I can go to someone's Animal Crossing island, and then I can play Super Mario World. When I've bought Super Mario World on every other Nintendo console, I can't play it here. I can't bring it over. I can't re-buy it. Like, you have such a history there, and you have such good games in those libraries that we know you have the licenses to, because you were releasing them on Wii, you were releasing them on Wii U, you were releasing them on 3DS, and now you come to your Switch, which would be the perfect place to have them. Be able to play at home and on the go, and we have to play this weird, cumbersome, constantly check online every 7 days thing so you can play Mario 1 on your Switch, and it's just so awkward for them to do it this way.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess what frustrates us the most about Nintendo is their highs are so high and their lows seem so avoidable. It's not like Nintendo's hand is forced when they've slipped up. It seems like very avoidable situations.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, again, the NES, phenomenal console. The Super Nintendo was knocking out of the park, fantastic. And then you go to the N64, which is a good console in its own right, amazing games on there. But the entire industry moves towards discs. No, we go towards cartridges, which ultimately allowed for a new player in the space, Sony, to jump in and leapfrog everyone. Yeah. And outsell them, which was, I mean, the idea of Nintendo being outsold by some newcomer, is mind-blowing at the time. And then the GameCube, they killed it, everything, phenomenal about that. Interesting discs, but it paid off. It was a good, and the PS2 obviously had the whole DVD thing that really helping them at the time, but I would never say that the GameCube was a miss by anything. The Wii, they go towards motion controls, they try to do something weird. But hey, they sold well. Cool. Wii U comes. What happened? They slipped up. Such an avoidable situation, but they slipped up. The power wasn't where it needed to be. The first party support wasn't where it needed to be. They didn't make a piece of hardware that was compelling. The gamepad, just so many issues with the Wii U. But then now they're here with the Switch, and it's a phenomenal console. And some of the issues with the Switch are just so avoidable in terms of the virtual console, in terms of some of the online infrastructure. But if they could just correct some of these small things, if they had a prominent virtual console on site, they had a good online infrastructure, I mean, they have the opportunity to have the best console they've ever released there, because it has the online, it has the handheld aspect, it has the docking section. You can make argument a phenomenal 3D Mario game. I wouldn't say the best, but to some people, maybe the best 3D Mario game. One of the best Mario Karts, if not the best Mario Karts on the title. New IPs like Splatoon are absolutely killing it. Splatoon 2 is a phenomenal game. They could have the best Metroid Prime if they play their cards right. They can have a great Paper Mario. I mean, there's nothing stopping them from the Switch being their dominant console. And they just need to pay attention to what made them great and kind of double down on that. And I don't think that it's outside the realm possibility that they could release a console better than the NES or the Super Nintendo in the future. I don't think that's an impossibility for them. They just need to keep their eyes on the prize, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, of course. They have to learn, and they're very stubborn on learning.
Very.
Everyone had to make mistakes. Sony, for the most part, dropped the ball for the PS3. And that's why they had to reinvent the console twice in its life cycle. And then the PS4 really amplified the good stuff. Xbox didn't amplify what made the 360 so fantastic, and they had to spend a whole generation fixing it. And now they're on top of their game, and things are looking good forward. Nintendo does this back and forth where they did good, they stumble, and then they slowly recover from their stumble instead of just fixing it. People want this, but they won't do it. They'll try to find workarounds to do it. And we can do it this way. We can do it this way. You want SNES games? Well, pay us $20 a year, and we'll randomly drip them to you when we feel like it, after no sort of a game plan. And it's you gotta learn. You gotta learn to fix these things. And everyone else is doing it, From my understanding, Google Stadia is trying to fix themselves. Who knows? But that's a different ballgame. But
we'll see with them, yeah.
Your competitors learned and fixed their mistakes. And, sometimes they don't, because right now, from what we're seeing, PS4 to PS5 looks to be kind of jumbled and stumbling with, stupid things like backwards compatibility. So they're not the only ones to do it, but they're the hard-headed ones to constantly not fix their mistakes and learn from their mistakes.
Yeah, well, our favorite Nintendo consoles, the NES and the Super Nintendo. For anybody who knows us, these are not surprises. We rant about these consoles very often.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, and next week we'll try to do the PlayStation, moving on with Xbox, and then ending it off with Sega. And Sega's going to be a very interesting one for both of us. I'm curious to see how we play off, because again, there's a lot of Sega consoles, first off, people don't even know about. So... And once you factor in the Sega CD and the 32X, I'll forget about it.
Yeah, it's gonna be. I'm excited for that one. I'm excited for that one.
Yeah, me too.